Welcome to the Fiction Writers Podcast, tips, tricks, and ideas for fiction that is #unputdownable. Today I'm delighted to welcome a new friend, Nicholas Anthony, to the broadcast. Nicholas writes under the name N. Vorderbruggen, and going to talk about that in a minute. Fun story. In 2014, Nick won the Final Drafts TV writing contest, which led to writing for CBS's Emmy-winning The Inspectors for 4 seasons. As a stand-up comedian, he took first place in the Las Vegas Comedy Festival and appeared on NBC's Last Comic Standing twice. He has performed for troops in Iraq and shared the stage with Dave Chappelle, Chris Rock, Norm Macdonald, and Maria Bamford. In 2022, after completing an intensive UCLA masterclass, he attended the Prague Summer Program for writers. And these days, he splits his time between Chechnya and Minnesota. He hates the cold, but loves the Vikings. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you, thank you. Not Czechia. Chechnya, I think, is in Russia. Czechia is what the Czechs call themselves. So it's the Czech Republic. My girlfriend is Czech.
Okay, sorry about that.
No, but that's okay. I have subsequently changed that in my. I just to me it's Czechia, and I forget that it's just the American pronunciation. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. It's hard not to see the N and no N.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, Prague is a beautiful city. If people have not been, I highly, highly recommend it. Great for artists and writers, and it's just a very inspiring place.
So tell us about the name thing.
So in 2017, you're talking about mine. So my name is Nicholas Anthony Borderbruggen. That's my legal name. And for years, I did stand-up comedy just under Nicholas Anthony or Nick Anthony, and it was just easier. It was just like Nick. Yeah, that sounds like a name for a stand-up comic. And I had a really awesome, fun career and got to travel all over the world and did comedy clubs. And eventually, it led to do some television writing and. So that was that part of my career. And then when the pandemic hit, I was actually performing on a cruise ship off the coast of Haiti when the pandemic was announced. And little did I know we were all about to get, grounded. Comedy, any sort of live performance was just completely halted. So I had a good year there where I didn't do what the thing that I'd been, my whole life. And during that time, I really fell in love with books and um, was able to take some of these intensive master classes through the UCLA extension program and kind of realized that my public school education in Minnesota didn't really serve me very well in terms of like actually understanding how to write prose. And I mean, I knew how to write screenplays and, obviously other, things, but in terms of actual prose, I really had to come back and kind of think of myself as a student. And so I took, I don't know, probably 10 classes through there. And one of the year-long intensives that I did, Robert Evers, who's a pretty famous novelist himself, um, he was a co-founder of the Prague Summer Program for writers. And I ended up in Prague. And my now girlfriend, the last 4 years, she was one of the co-runners of the program at the time. And so yeah, so we I bought a house back in Minnesota, and my yeah, and so we split time between here and Prague, and so N. Vorderbergen just for the pseudonym for this first novel project that I'm working on.
I love it because it's so distinctive.
It really, yeah, it's fun. There's actually, I think, I did some research on there's I guess a famous bluegrass musician who uses the name. And so it's got, I love Bob Dylan and stuff like that. So I was like, I'm just gonna run with it. It's such a part of my childhood because everyone would call me by it's like I played sports and Vorderbruggen is like a 13 letter name. It's one of those big clumsy names. And so What's funny is the name Border Brugen then got turned into Vorder Banger or Vorder da 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 da, and then I had nicknames off of that nickname, and then somebody will come up to me and they'll be, they'll say the nickname that's based off of the nickname and somebody that doesn't know me from then will be like, "What did they just call you?" And then I have to explain the lineage of like, no, it morphed into this like ridiculous thing. So I don't know. It's pseudonyms and all that stuff. Like, we're all kind of grasping in the dark. I just thought it would, again, it's just we're wearing skin suits on a rock floating through infinite nothingness. Why not have some fun with it? And I just am embracing that that what my legal name is. So
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So is this your first book that we're talking about today?
yeah, yep. This is my debut novel. I started writing it in 2018-ish. And I just finished it, I would say probably this time last year. And uh, this summer I was back in Prague this summer working on my second book. And so yeah, the querying process, I'm in the middle of the querying process right now, and I'm probably about 80 to 100 queries in.
Wow.
And I've maybe heard back from five of them, and I don't even think I don't, it doesn't feel like anyone's like given me any like, oh, I actually read this and here's my perspective, like it's just like, hey, it's like dating. It's like, you have to kind of, I don't know. I've never done this before, and I've, went through this process as a young stand-up comic where you're trying to like just figure out, all right, where do I belong? And it was daunting as a comic, and now it feels very similar, and it's frustrating, obviously for everyone, but I think most specifically because I feel like the writing, not only the nonfiction writing I'm doing on my Substack, but the edit that I'm releasing slowly, kind of through the Substack as well. I just feel like it's as sharp as I just feel really good about it, and so to it's like I don't know. It's just there's so many people that have all sorts of different levels of, you have everything from Dan Brown to Toni Morrison, like all these people talk about I just read a thing about John Banville and how he never made any money off of his novels. And it's like, oh man, I love Banville. And it's like, all right, so maybe how do you frame what the expectation is going to be and how much effort do you put into querying? Because querying is its own process that you have to really like, even if you just take some list, you still have to like, they have specific requests. And so every query, you can't just like push a button and, 300 queries go out. You have to really kind of do a little bit of investigating and see who's, you know, how much do you tailor it to any specific agent, and then you just I don't know. I've been slowly kind of doing it over time. Like I try to do when I sit down to write, I'll like, all right, I'll kick out five, and it's like, well, that eats up an hour or two of my time.
Hmm.
And then it's like, well, should I be? So you're playing that game too of like, but I promised myself I would do 300 queries. If at that point, I gotta just trust the universe, and I guess that would probably lead into your next question in terms of like the decision to release some of this in terms of serializing it.
So
Um,
is this when you're talking about 300 queries? Is that for this book, Two Hits of Acid in Cambodia?
correct.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. I've had agents in the past for representation for stand up and for the screenwriting stuff, but this is it's a completely different it's a completely it's like starting at square one again. And part of that is really exciting because I've also been able to fall in love with novels and have read probably, I don't know, 200 or 300 novels over the last, you know, I mean, I remember when I started at UCLA, all my references were always film based, like in terms of plot and devices. And now it's just really nice to be able to like, oh no, I can actually reference. And so it's just made me my writing is just a lot deeper. And
Hmm.
so Yeah.
So you decided to release it as a serial. Now, first of all, explain what a serial is so everyone understands, and then talk about what led you to make that decision.
So the plan isn't necessarily to release the entire book serialized. I'm not sure yet what I'm going, I think there's probably like 25 chapters. And I was releasing them every other week or so-ish around there, a couple, two a month or something. And, you know, to my surprise, I was able to, I'm up to like 1,100 subscribers on Substack, which is not nothing. And, that's exciting. So I get regular viewership and then there's interactions and so that part of, I think the performer in me really likes that. I think I'm engaging with an audience and because even if, let's say, one of these agents hits and then we find a publisher, the chances of someone actually having a budget to then also, market your book isn't super high these days. And so I think even with those things, you're going to have to, be creative about how you find people who like your work. And so I was just, as opposed to, because I have no idea what's going to happen with these queries. Um, I'm not somebody who just likes to sit on their hands. And so I was like, well, it was a double fold. One, it was this time last year, and I was like, I've got so many articles in me, and I have this novel. I'll post it up as like, hey, I'm gonna post, lifestyle and travel stuff. I do a lot of traveling, and I do some food blogging, and then intermittently, I can, kind of stream it with this novel because I love short stories. I love serialized things, and in an ideal world, it's like, oh, hey, this book does have some pretty intense cliffhangers. Could we along the way, could there be some virality to it? And we're just trying that. And so far, it's not like it's been incredibly, insanely explosive. But I think anyone I've talked to, and I tell them like, oh yeah, I'm getting a thousand, reads on my piece, and it's like, but that's something, like that's not nothing. And uh, so just trying to build from that. I think what will happen, and I don't know for sure, but I'm going to keep querying. If I could decide, I would have some sort of representation, and I probably wouldn't serialize the end of the book. But the idea that, hey, I just trying to think from a consumer's perspective, if someone was, into it and they got to read half of the book for free, and then the book was available as a digital download, or I think what I'm going to do is if anybody's a paid subscriber on my Substack, if we print it, I'll just send them a free copy of it. But I haven't, solidified all of that, and it's kind of happening in real time. So I'm 8 chapters in. If you at about 15, there's like a really good there's a cliffhanger that that might be the point that I stop and maybe do like I was thinking about I don't know if you're familiar with Brandon Sanderson, but he's a very, very popular fantasy writer. And if you go into a Barnes and Noble at all, he has a whole section just of his books. Well, he has the most famous Kickstarter and the most successful Kickstarter in the history of crowdfunding. And he was already an established fantasy writer before he did this, but he ended up, I think it was like $40 million he had these books that he had written during the pandemic, and then he released them. And so there's an interesting potential market with the idea of being able to kind of like, not only are you using it as a marketing tool to help get the story out, but then you're also getting people, let's say I just want to even do like, I don't know, 300 author copies just for, friends and family while I'm going through this. Now, I've talked to people who are published, and I've talked to agents, and a lot of people are saying like, you can't, we're not going to publish something that's already released. And then you look at a book like The Martian by Andy Weir, and it's like, well, he serialized this on his blog at the time, And, eventually he found an audience and eventually, so, as opposed, so what is the industry telling me? Just write your book, query. If no one responds, do nothing, let it sit in a drawer. And it's like, I just, I don't know. I'd rather share the story, even if it's just, I mean, I have like, I don't know, 5,000 Facebook friends, and some of that's overlap from when I did stand up. So there are some people that are paying attention, and whether that develops a groundswell and I can kind of add to that is to be determined. And I guess I'm just trying that and trying to do something non-traditional because I just don't know. And I don't think anyone knows. I think we're all kind of grasping in the dark, and this feels right to my gut. And I really, really enjoy doing it. And I love sharing it. And I've written something I love travel writing. And I'm just a huge fan of plot-driven narratives, having written for television. And I wanted to write something that felt more like how I traveled, but with character arc. So I'll read so many things that are like quote unquote travel writing, but there's not really like the character they're too short to really have any sort of character arc. And I don't know. It's inspired by the 1920s expatriate, writers, you know, the F. Scott Fitzgeralds and the Hemingways and that kind of stuff. But it's also inspired by modern travel writing and wanting to write things in ways and kind of towing that line. You know how like fiction and autofiction can kind of blur sometimes, and this idea of travelogue and straight up fiction. Um, if I'm writing it from first person and in present tense, the idea was, can I write something that feels evergreen, but as someone's reading it, it feels like you're on that trip with that person.
Hmm.
And it made me think about, I have friends that I grew up with in Minnesota, and they're awesome people, but they're never going to take this trip. They're never going to go to Vietnam. They're never going to go to Cambodia. They're never going to know what it's like to ride a motorbike through Angkor Wat. And so in my mind's eye, I love the idea of my friend, on pause from work, doing whatever they're doing and being able to be like, hey man, I can go on this little vacation and yeah, that's yeah. I don't want to sound too highfalutin about anything. It was just, trying to write a cool story about these two guys that went on a trip.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about what the story's about.
So essentially, it's about Eli and Michael, and this is loosely based on a trip that I took in 2017, but it is fictionalized. And it's two guys, they're Midwesterners, and they are in Los Angeles. Eli had been writing for a TV show that got canceled, and so was just kind of floundering. And then Michael moved out to Los Angeles just because he had a failed marriage and he was just trying to get away from whatever, you know, he just grew up in Cincinnati, and his dad was a soldier in Vietnam in the 70s. And right before the book starts, his dad dies of Agent Orange exposure.
Mm.
And the Eli character had gone through a bunch of losses of his own, not to death, but to life. And I see more women writers talking about women losing relationships with women. I don't see a lot of male writers talking about how hard it is when you lose a friendship with another man, and how tough that can be. And that was something that when I brought these early pages into the UCLA writing program, people were really responding to it. And because predominantly in writing classes, and there's just it was mostly women. I was usually either, it was a lot of and I grew up with all my I have lots of sisters. My mom has lots of sisters, and so I was always a man in as raised by a lot of in my stand-up show. And I feel weird even saying this because it's a stand-up comedy joke that I used to do, but the joke in my show was I was raised by so many women. I wore my towel up to my armpits till I was like 15. And in, and in a day when, there's, you know, I don't know, in terms of identity and, how people, I was just, I guess, although a very masculine, male, uh, was raised with the sensitivity of a lot of female energy. And so I have more propensity to want to talk about my emotions and my interiority and, and in that camp, even though as a straight white man, um, and so when I look back at like Hemingway's "The Sun Also Rises" or even Fitzgerald and stuff like that, there's interiority, but there's not really there is a lack of like emotional vulnerability, and that's something that I feel like whatever yeah. I mean, I would rather have other people tell me what the writing feels like, but for me, when I look back, I'm trying to, capture that terse style, um, but with, you know, and a very masculine perspective, but at the same time, somebody, because the the Michael character in the story is more of a traditional 20th century, doesn't talk about his feelings guy. And Eli's the guy who's like putting too much pressure on this trip to come home different because he doesn't like where his life's at. And it I think it really tackles this concept of, do you need to a different life or did you just need a vacation? And I think Eli starts this book with the idea that he needed a new life, and the reality is he just needed a break. And he puts too much pressure on this trip to kind of like have some moment of existential, understanding. And it puts a lot of pressure on not only the trip, but his relationship with Michael and ends up kind of being the catalyst for the conflict throughout.
Hmm. So where did the title come from? Two hits of acid in Cambodia.
So in real life, when I took this trip, I went to a friend of mine, and he had two old, as he called them, two old hits of acid that he had had in some tinfoil. And I was just like, all right, maybe I'll take them and just shove them in my wallet and see what happens. And in real life, I kind of just forgot about them. Like I didn't, it's literally like smaller, like I can't even, you couldn't, it's very, very little. And it's just, so this idea of like, hey, I remember at one point in the trip, I was like, oh, I have an illegal substance on me. And I'm like going through international borders and all this stuff. And it's like, now, would anyone have ever found it? I don't think so. I think it's pretty innocuous. But I just wanted to play with this idea of having, psychedelics. And then we ended up having this experience on an island off the coast of Cambodia called Sihanoukville. And the island's called, or Sihanoukville is the city on the coast, but the island is called Koh Rong. And I don't know what it's like now because I'm assuming they've built it up, but this was pre-roads. There were no McDonald's. It was walking paths, and there were a couple, like boutique hotels, but we were literally staying in huts for like $10 a night, like right on the ocean. And we ended up taking, like not even knowing if the acid was any good or, and so we took this and had a psychedelic experience on a hike through Koh Rong. And I used that as inspiration for their experience that, I would say I don't, I guess I haven't really officially decided how I'm presenting it publicly, but I guess it's fair to call it is a work of fiction. Um, and I guess I'll just leave it at that. It might, I don't know if you're familiar with like Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Um, that's a
Hmm.
what they call autofiction. So technically, it's a work of fiction, but you're using some of the same names. I'm doing, all the names have been changed, all of, and then in terms of like what really happened, like I don't even, at this point, I don't even really remember because I've been working on this. this fictionalized version of it for so long, and it's meant to be a story. Now, the thing I'm attempting to do is I want someone who doesn't know me. When people read it and they know me, they just kind of it feels more like a travelogue to them. But the
Mhm.
idea is if somebody didn't know me and they read this, they would think, "Oh, this feels like a travelogue." And then by the time you get to the end, you realize like, "Oh man, there's like a whole like kind of sneakily there was a plot through all of this." And you then can kind of have that moment when you look back through the story and you're like, "Oh, okay." And so that was the attempt. Whether that's successful is we'll leave that up to an audience.
So I want to just drill down for a minute here on that word autofiction. Is that autobiographical fiction?
Yeah, yeah. Robert Pirsig, actually also from Minnesota. He wrote this book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and it was so he at one point in his life was had some mental health issues, and they literally zapped his brain, and he was a working professor in Montana, I believe, and he wrote a it's considered kind of that seminal work of auto fiction where it was like he, yes, all of these things happen, but he wrote them in kind of like a he wrote them in a way where the scenes were crisper, I guess. You would argue so at the beginning of Hemingway's career he writes Sun Also Rises, but he changes the name. That whole book, there's another book called in the end it's a Vanity Fair writer, and she took the time to basically find all the characters in the novel and then find their equivalent in real life and then what happened to them. And she goes into tremendous. I think eventually everyone behaves badly is the name of the book, and it's a great book if you're a fan of Hemingway and you're a fan of his first book, The Sun Also Rises, which is in Europe it's called Fiesta. They have a different title for it, but that book is about him being an expatriate in France and them going to Pamplona to the Basque country in Spain for the bull run. And it really does capture that momentum of a trip and what it's like to go and have these experiences. And it's such a at the time the world had no idea about this amazing, incredible, and even now, the running of the bulls is like a whole. I mean, it feels like it's like an exhibition from like a far gone era. Like it doesn't feel like I've now done it 2 years. I did it in 2022, and then we ran with the bulls again last year with another friend of mine. And when you see bullfighting, it's really hard. It's like I can understand why there's pushback on it from like, animal rights activist perspective, but then I can also understand, you're in a place that has, you know, generation. So you have a little kid who's like 3 years old. He's wearing all the white with the red sash, and then you have his older brother and sisters, and then you have the moms and the dads, and then you have the aunts and uncles, and then you have the grandparents, and they're all playing the accordions, and it's not just like when you go to Mardi Gras where it's just like a drunken mess. This is like there's something very, very, very deep, and you feel like you're a part of something. And so if you go and have experiences like that and you write about it, but then uh, the fancy literature term is a roman à clef, where essentially you're just changing the names. Where does that line, if, and I think people are fascinated by that. And I think potentially that's something that I kind of leaned into in terms of like, well, would people add, how much of this is true? Because I go into tremendous detail about some very salacious topics. I mean, one being the fact that, drugs were brought across international borders. There's also all sorts of, at one point the characters find a dead body. And this is something that happened to me one time when I was on a trip. And from like a storytelling perspective, they're always, this taste of death or this ability to like you're on vacation and all of a sudden now you're seeing potentially like a ghost of Christmas future lying on the ground in front of your hotel. That brings up, and I just, I don't know. For me, what I didn't want was, hey, it's two people who decide to go on a vacation and then cut wheels land in Vietnam. This was really more getting into the pathology of of that. I think at this point, uniquely American experience of knowing we live in a place that's like we're very lucky. Like we're even, middle class or, I don't know about, I mean, but let's say specifically somebody middle class who would think like, hey, I'm not doing that well. Well, historically, you're still in the 1% of the world currently. And in the 1% of 1% historically, like your life is still so much better. Yet there's some sort of disconnect there. And now I'm part of a generation that feels like maybe it's going to be even a little less good than the generation before us. And so is this thing drifting in a way that I don't know what is. And so this idea of we're at a time now where traveling because of the way, the cost of air travel can be pretty inexpensive. And if you're smart about it, you can do it pretty inexpensively. And with I don't know. I think this is an interesting time with the way smartphones are working, where it's like, hey, you could Airbnb your place, you could, book everything on your phone, you could find a bunch of reviews so you're not going someplace and it's like a fascinating time to travel. And it's also, when anyone is at a time in their life where they feel like, hey, man, things aren't working out. This put everything on a credit card and go see what happens I just have felt that maybe specifically with men my age, that maybe got married too young or they just hit a time in their life. I don't know if it's midlife necessarily, but even in their 30s where it's just like maybe we've had it so good for so long we don't really understand what real conflict looks like. And so going out and traveling not just for the sake of vacationing but really to push yourself to to maybe get someplace where it's a little scarier and way outside of your comfort zone and then to see, and I think Eli is almost too aware of that. And he's somebody who is, this character, again, loosely based on myself, has read all of these books of these people who go out and have these amazing adventures and then they come back changed. Well, now you have a character who's almost too aware of that and is using this trip almost as like a prescription to help himself get out of whatever rut he's in. And so that was kind of the genesis of, how do I show these guys? And at the beginning of the book, I didn't realize how much people would love because I write a lot about what I refer to as like the middle class of Hollywood, where it's working professionals, but people who aren't necessarily like famous or wealthy. And that's a huge portion of LA. And people don't think about that. People think about the famous people, and then you think that everyone else is just kind of starving or something. And it's like, no, there's a whole middle class, and just like middle class people anywhere, it, it's tough. It's a grind. And,
Hmm.
and at the same time, very grateful to even have had those opportunities. But you still go like, well, what is my life? Like if you're not sitting on enough money where it's like, I still need a job. I still need to keep it moving. I still need, and so that stuff, I don't know. It's really that that was another thing that surprised me when I shared these pages. There was lots of people who were like, I just want a novel about that, Nick. I want to. So I think that's a good jumping off spot. I think it's a really fun place to grab people and people like that world. And then we get into, we get into this story and, I'm writing about places that people may have gone. I think most people probably haven't been to a lot of these places, but I'm also writing about it from the perspective of a very honest, like a brutally honest perspective that I don't see a lot of. I don't, I'm trying to think of the books. There's that whole idea that novels are in conversation with the novels that came before them, and so I was thinking like, well, what's that genre? And eventually, I got to it's the picaresque, so which goes all the way back to like Don Quixote, and goes back to like novels like Gulliver's Travels and Voltaire's Candide. And these books, when you think of, again, I didn't grow up around a bunch of like highly educated people, but when I went back and I started learning about novel writing, I started reading these books and like, you hear the name Voltaire and you think like, oh, it's so inaccessible. And then you read Candide and it's like such an easy, fun, simple read. And at the end, there's actually this really nice metaphor about tending to your own garden. And it's very simple and it's really beautiful. And then if you want to get deeper, it's also about like um, oh man, what is the Spanish Inquisition is part of it, and like there's all these layers to Candide that I didn't even necessarily understand when I was first reading it. But you can also just read it as a fun story,
Mhm.
and that's what it feels like when I read those early Hemingway novels, and when I read Gulliver's Travels, and um, I'm trying to think of other picaresques. Even Mark Twain, like Huckleberry Finn is a picaresque. And
Mhm.
that picaresque is, again, just a fancy literary word that just means people of low-born status then going out into the world and having an adventure and then, coming back and bringing whatever information they found back to wherever they're from, which is, also somewhat Joseph Campbellian, if you will. But
Mhm.
um, and again, like me, because I am so aware of all of these different ideas that this is how a lot of people kind of grew as just humans. I think I found it fascinating to write a character who was like, oh no, I'm gonna go do that thing, and then it's gonna make me into this. It's gonna heal me, or I'm gonna figure something out. And it's like that's a lot of pressure to put on a trip, man.
Yeah.
That's a lot of pressure.
And a friendship.
Correct.
Yeah, yeah. So you have the book on your website. Give the website so people can go over there and take a look at the first 8 chapters.
Yeah. So if you just go to nicholasanthony.com, Nicholas Anthony.com, that is a link right to my Substack. And Two Hits of Acid in Cambodia is the name of the book, and there's a tab, and you can read. Right now, I have 8 chapters up, and then in between releasing those chapters, I'm also releasing just uh, either food type stuff. I read a lot about I love going to Michelin restaurants, and I love going to really cool, really creative restaurants. And so I read a lot about that. And I write, some lifestyle stuff, some travel stuff, some opinion stuff. Nothing too political, but like for instance, having been a comedian, and then I was in Hungary when Steve Colbert was announced that he's gonna stop doing the Late Show, and that hit me at a weird time because I was in a country that is, with Viktor Orban having not left office, and now we're in a situation, whatever your politics are, I, you now have my attention when you start messing with the comedians. And so I was able to write. I was in a museum called I think it's just called the Terror Museum, and it was essentially a museum it was ahead of the secret police in Hungary, basically through the whole 20th century. First with the Nazis up until 45, and then from 45 till 91 with the Soviets. So it's this incredibly intense place, and they have this dramatic elevator that brings you to the basement where there's a gallows, and that same day I found out, it's just like, what are we taking for granted? What is a big deal? What isn't a big deal? When do we need to get political? And as somebody who's not naturally like a very political person necessarily in terms of like, left or right politics, I've become, I think, more of a centrist. I still think there can be common sense writing that I I really think that we need to be talking to each other more. Now, does that type of writing get the clicks? I'm not sure. And, I'm maybe I need to, push one way or the other to really, find success. But that isn't naturally who I am. I guess I'm in that respect a bit more of like a humanist and wanting to find common sense solutions. And
Hmm.
to me, 80% of the people agree about 90% of the stuff. and we just get ripped apart into these camps, and as a result we then start hating each other. So I'm more interested in finding our shared humanity, and I think everyone wants to go on it. Everyone's at a time in their life where I've been working too hard, I need a vacation. Either they can't figure it out, or they don't figure it out, or family or something. And this book is in an attempt to kind of like, hey, you could read this and you could feel like you're going on vacation.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Wow, time's about up. Is there anything you'd like to add? Anything you'd like
Just
to?
Yeah, grateful for your time, and I feel like I'm just talking away. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, no, that's what I want you to do.
Yeah.
My questions are prompts,
Yeah.
just, to give you that open door. That's what I'm here for. So,
Yeah, it's just really fun, and the biggest thing is, if someone goes on and reads some chapters, like I want to hear people's feedback. Even if it's you have a note or whatever, like I'm interested in people's perspective, and it's early for me. I mean, this is a fun process, and as wherever people are in their process, like I'm pretty open-minded at this point, and
mhm.
yeah, I want to engage, and if other people, I'm also very interested in this idea of serializing. If anyone knows of other books that are serialized on Substack, I would be fascinated in that, and I'd love to start that dialogue.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being with us today.
Lana, thank you.
Yes. And thank you for being with us today. See you next time.